This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, hello, and thanks for joining us today for our event conversations about consent, hosted by Montgomery County Women's Center Education and Outreach Team in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We're excited that you're here with us today and hope that this information will be informative and help expand your knowledge about sexual assault and consent. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to be talking a little bit about, if I can get my screen to change, 1 second. There we go. So first, we're going to start out talking about what are some myths that you have heard about consent. So we're going to take just a second, go ahead and jot some down or think about what are some myths that that you've heard around sexual assault or consent, more specifically consent and how it works, maybe what some of the factors are, and then we'll talk about them in just a second. All right, so we're going to discuss 5 myths that we tend to hear about this idea of consent and what consent is. So, number one, the first myth is that boundaries aren't essential, that boundaries don't really matter. So we might hear one partner say, my partner loves me so much that they want to spend all of their time with me. So starting a new relationship can feel really, really amazing. The urge to want to spend all of your time together can be hard to overcome at times. But an essential quality of a healthy relationship is feeling in control of yourself, feeling in control of your choices, feeling in control of your space. And you have boundaries and you can change them as needed within that relationship. You should still have ample room in that relationship to do things that interest you, to get your schoolwork or your job work done, to excel in the different areas of your life, to exercise, to hang out with friends, that sort of thing. Your partner shouldn't just tolerate those things, but celebrate them with you. Your goals shouldn't be second best to spending time with them. Your partner should be your cheerleader. They should be proud of you and brag about you and have your back. So check your gut. Ask yourself, do you feel accepted and respected as an individual, as a whole person in that relationship? Are your outside interests valued? Or is your only value that of your partners? Okay, myth number 2 is that consent is only about sex. So you may have heard someone say, oh my gosh, my significant other is so clingy. They hang all over me at school or in public, and it's really not comfortable for me. I'm afraid to say anything because I don't want to hurt their feelings. So a lot of people think that that consent relates only to sex, but it actually goes way beyond, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in our presentation today. But quite simply, consent is a line that you draw between what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. Inside or outside of the bedroom. This can range from public affection to how fast they drive with you in the car to whether they show up unannounced at your front door. If your relationship is consensual, you don't feel pressured to do anything that you're not comfortable doing. They touch you in ways that you invite. They listen and adjust if you ask them to stop something that you dislike. They show up when invited, and they also give space when needed and accept you when you change your mind. So check in with your gut. Ask yourself, are you comfortable with the amount of intensity in your relationship? Do you feel pressure to do things that you're not comfortable with, whether they're sexual or otherwise? All right, myth number 3. Myth number 3 is that silence means yes. You might have heard this quite a bit, right? So you may have heard someone say, I didn't explicitly tell them no, but I wasn't comfortable and I didn't want to do it. So sometimes silence is mistaken for consent, but it's not. Consent should be an explicit and verbal indication that someone is comfortable with and enthusiastic about what is happening, whether it's making out or sex or other areas of the relationship. Only yes means yes. And in states like California and Texas and many other states, that is the law. Good communication and strong positive agreement is a sign that what's happening in your relationship is comfortable, that your partner checks in with you. They make sure that you're comfortable with how you're being touched. They don't take your silence for granted. They proceed at a comfortable pace, giving you an out if you need to stop doing what you're doing. So check in with your gut. Ask yourself, are you a full participant in the decision-making process about what you're doing? Can you articulate what you want and what you don't want? And are you being heard by your partner? All right, myth number 4 is no take backs. So we might have heard someone say something like, I already said I wanted this, so I guess I just have to go along with it, or we've done it before, so maybe I have to do it again. One of the most empowering things about consent is that it's not permanent. This puts you firmly in the driver's seat of your own experience and firmly in control of your own body. A sign of a healthy relationship is that you can change your mind at any point and for any reason. And a sign of a healthy, caring partner is one that will listen, that will respect your wishes, and who will not pressure you. What a better way to ensure a totally comfortable and mutually enjoyable experience, right? This goes for intimacy that's happening in real time as well as intimacy over time, whether you give consent 5 seconds ago or last week. If it's not right now, it's not right. So check in with your gut. Ask yourself, how do you feel in the moment when you're being intimate? Do you have the freedom to stop what you're doing, or are there consequences, or will there be blame? All right, myth number 5, all's fair when you're drunk. We may have heard someone say, I was drinking a lot, which they took as an open invitation to do ... If consent needs to be explicit and isn't permanent, then it is impossible to give when you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. In a caring relationship, your partner knows that they don't have permission to be sexual. So they don't take advantage of situations like that. Instead, they back off and wait until you're sober and have your wits about you. So check in with your gut. Ask yourself, if you were under the influence, would you still feel 100% safe and protected with your partner? All right, so these are 5 common myths about consent. Again, they are myth number 1, that boundaries aren't essential in a relationship. Myth number 2, that consent is only about sex. Myth number 3, that silence means yes. Myth number 4, no takebacks. And myth number 5, all's fair when you're drunk. So what exactly is consent? The idea of consent can get a little convoluted and difficult for people to understand at times. So the term consent means the affirmative, ambiguous, and voluntary agreement to engage in a specific sexual activity. Consent is when one person agrees to or gives permission to another person to do something. Consent means agreeing to an action based on your knowledge of what that action involves, like its consequences, and having the option of saying no. The absence of a no does not mean yes. Consent is a very important part of a sexual relationship. Each person is responsible for their own comfort and safety. Consent is an important part of healthy sexuality, and both people should be involved in the decision to participate in that activity. So back in my day, we weren't taught that the absence of a no does not mean yes. We were taught as girls and as women that it was our job to say no if we felt uncomfortable, and it was our job to stop whatever the behavior was. And we realized that that was putting a lot of pressure on one partner, on one person, to stop that behavior. And so now we teach affirmative consent. And so affirmative consent is getting the yes, right? Asking the question and getting the yes, making sure that that we're having that conversation, that we are talking about it, that we are our partner is aware of the consequences of what can happen, and making sure that we get the yes. So here's some different criteria. I love this image here that goes through and kind of breaks down the 4 different criteria for consent. So number 1, consent is clear. It's expressed through words or actions that create mutually understandable permission. Consent is never implied, and the absence of a no is not a yes. Silence is not consent. I'm not sure, I don't know, maybe, and similar phrases are not consent. So let's back up a little bit to this top one. That consent is expressed through words or actions that create mutual understandable permission. So if we think about the difference between words and actions, can actions be misconstrued? Can actions be misunderstood? If we're at a party and you come over and you're hitting on me, or use your best line and I giggle, does that mean that I'm giving consent for that behavior? Or could that mean that I'm embarrassed or I'm uncomfortable? Do people giggle when they're embarrassed or uncomfortable? If you come over and lay your best line on me and I blush, does that mean that I'm into it? Or does that mean that potentially I am embarrassed or uncomfortable or not really into it? And so, can actions be misunderstood? Absolutely, they can, especially when we are in the mindset that we want something to happen. Sometimes when we are gung ho and super into someone and we want a particular action or behavior or response from them, we can sometimes look past, the actions of that person. So that's why it's really, really important to have the conversation and ask the question and get that affirmative verbal consent. Okay. So number two, consent is coherent. People incapacitated by drugs or alcohol cannot consent. Someone who cannot make reasonable, rational decisions because they lack the capacity to understand the who, what, where, when, why, or how of that situation cannot consent. People who are asleep or in other vulnerable positions cannot consent. Um, it never fails when I am doing this presentation, someone will raise their hand and say, well, how do you know if someone is too drunk? Or how do you know if someone is too high to be able to have sex or move forward? To me, if you have to ask yourself that question, then they probably are too drunk or too high. They can't make that decision for themselves. When we have to ask ourselves, are they too blank to move forward? We're almost rationalizing for ourselves that moving forward without their consent is okay. All right. All right. So number three criteria for consent is that they're willing, right? Consent is a willing choice. It's never given under pressure. So consent is not obtained through psychological or emotional manipulation. Consent cannot be obtained through physical violence or threat. And someone in an imbalance of power situation, someone under your authority cannot consent. So we may see this happen in a couple of different instances in things like an employer or employee, a manager, and someone who's under them, a teacher and a student, regardless of age. When we talk about teacher and student, we may think just, middle school, high school, but even college. Um, are you entering into a relationship with a professor or a TA? These are important things. This imbalance of power. We may think it's really cool at first. We may think about all the perks that we're going to get at first by entering into a relationship with someone who has authority over us. But we don't really think of the consequences of that. So if I enter into a relationship with my boss or my manager, and then I decide I don't want to be in that relationship anymore, there are lots of consequences that can come with that. I could lose my job. I could get all the crappy shifts. I could be forced to open up or close the facility with that person and be put in a situation where I feel uncomfortable that I don't want to be in. I may, if I'm with a teacher or a professor or a teaching assistant, my grades may suffer. I may get called down in class more, made to look or feel, stupid in class. I may have to go to office hours with that person in a private setting that, puts me in a position that I feel uncomfortable. And they have power over the outcome of my situation. Okay. Consent criteria number 4 is that it's ongoing. Consent must be granted every time. So consent must be obtained each step of the way of physical intimacy. If someone consents to one sexual activity, she or he may or may not be willing to go further. Okay, so just because I do something once doesn't mean that implicitly that means that I, am game for that every single time. Or just because I do one thing, like just because we go home together and we sit on the couch, or just because we move into the bedroom doesn't mean that sex is inevitable, right? So consent needs to be obtained every step of the way and each and every time. All right, so consent or coercion. Do you know the difference? So saying no does not necessarily mean convince me, which is interesting because I think a lot of the times we're taught the opposite of that. I could probably go into any middle school, high school, or college classroom and ask, does no mean no? And a handful of students may say no means not right now, or no means convince me, no means try harder. And it's this game that sometimes can be played, or that we're taught is played. So we have to be really careful. Is this person consenting, or am I coercing them into that behavior? Um, so what does coercion sound like? Coercion sounds like you shouldn't have come here if you didn't want to, repeatedly asking someone to do this behavior or participate in this 3, 4, 5 times after this person has already said no. Saying things like you've done it before, so you should be okay with this now, you should do it again. Can't you just do this for me? It's something I really want or something I really need. I thought you liked me. If you really liked me, you would do this. I promise you'll like it. I don't understand what the big deal is. Come on, let's just do it, right? So, consent is giving someone the option to say yes or no, and then respecting what their choice is. Coercion is trying to convince that person that something they don't want to do is good for them, or will be good for the relationship, or is good for you. Okay. All right. So a lot of times people say, okay, so I get the idea of consent. I get that I need to ask. I get that I need to get the yes, right? The affirmative. I need that yes, but it's really awkward, right? It can be really strange. I feel funny. Asking someone, do I have consent to blank, 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 right? Can sound really awkward. But the truth is, it doesn't have to be awkward. There's a lot of ways we can ask for consent that are not dorky or don't make you feel, weird. So I love this image. Ask the cutie before you touch the booty, right? So maybe we can say things like, are you enjoying yourself? Do you like that? Is that okay? Does that feel good, or does that feel okay? You look uncomfortable. Are you okay? Is it okay if I blank? What feels good for you? What do you want? Do you like it when I blank? Gosh, this feels really good for me. Do you like it too? So just checking in with them, making sure that they're doing okay, making sure that they want to, move forward. So there's a lot of ways that we can check in. Now, does that mean you need to be asking a question, every minute, every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes? Probably not. But making sure that you are checking in with them verbally and making sure that they're okay. So I want to ask you about these two questions, these two check-in questions. So the first one is, do you want to keep going? And the second one is, do you want to stop? Do you think that there's a difference between those questions? If so, what might the difference be? Okay, so these are two check-in questions. I think if you're checking in any way, shape, or form verbally with your partner, you're doing something really great, right? But think about the context of these two questions. If we are on a date and we go back to my place and we are super hot and heavy and we're on the couch, and um, maybe I'm noticing some pushback, or maybe I'm just, checking in with you, and I say, do you want to keep going? Do you think that there is an answer that I'm looking for? Do you think that you may feel pressured to say yes or continue if I ask, do you want to keep going? Right? I'm I may be looking for the yes. Versus if I look at you and say, do you want to stop, or do you want to take a break? Is there one that you would feel more comfortable saying, okay, yeah, all right, maybe we're getting a little, carried away. Maybe we need to take a quick break. Can I get a glass of water? Can we just sit here and talk for a minute? Is there one that you might feel more comfortable? Which one is more open to a yes, I would like to stop, right? And again, if you're checking in with your partner, I think you're doing great. You're one step ahead of the game, right? But then the next step is to be thinking about, how are we asking those questions? How are we wording the question? Are we wording them to benefit us, or are we wording them truthfully to check in and allow our partner an out if that is what they're looking for? Okay. So know the signs. How can you tell if someone's not into it? So yes, we want to get the verbal, but sometimes people say that they're okay when really they're not okay. And sometimes there are pretty blatant signs right there in front of our face that we are ignoring or not really paying attention to because we are working towards a desired outcome, right? Whether it's because we really care about this person or we are just really wanting to have sex. Um, so verbal versus nonverbal cues, right? How to tell if you have consent. So it's pretty clear if someone says, no, stop, I don't want to, I don't know, I'm not sure, I don't think so, I want to, but, right? This is making me uncomfortable. I don't want to do this anymore. This feels wrong. Maybe we should wait. They're constantly changing the subject or trying to get out of that situation, right? We clearly do not have consent. But what does nonverbal behavior look like? If someone is not into that situation. So maybe they're pushing away or pulling away. Maybe they're avoiding eye contact, shaking their head no, avoiding eye contact, not responding physically, so just laying there motionless, not really participating in what's going on. They may look scared or sad. They may even be crying. Um, Maybe they are not removing their own clothing, like participating in that process of what's happening next, and you're having to do everything. Then that may be a sign that that person is not really consenting, and you would probably want to check in with them and make sure that they're doing okay and that they want to continue to move forward, and that they're okay with everything that's happening. All right. So next up, how does alcohol affect consent, and does alcohol affect consent? Um, so the truth is that alcohol and drug abuse actually do impact consent quite a bit. So we talked about that in our criteria for consent, that someone who's under the influence of drugs or alcohol cannot give consent in a situation because they don't understand really the situation or the repercussions that can happen um, in that situation. So drugs and alcohol impact decision making and blur the lines of consent. When drugs and alcohol are involved, clear consent cannot be obtained. An intoxicated person cannot give consent. Alcohol and other drugs complicate asking and giving consent. It's important to remember that alcohol is often used to commit sexual violence, and is considered to be the most used date rape drug. However, remember that it is not alcohol that causes sexual violence, rather, it is the choice of the person perpetrating it. A person cannot um, a person cannot give consent if they're under the influence of alcohol or drugs. This includes someone who is passed out, engaging in sexual activities, including having sex with a person who is heavily intoxicated, is illegal. Remember that if you're unsure whether someone is sober enough to consent, it's best to play it safe and not engage in any sexual activity at all. It's your responsibility as the person initiating the sexual act to obtain consent, that verbal affirmative consent. Even if you are also drunk or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, this means that you can and will be held responsible for any act of sexual violence that can occur. Okay. All right. So, what does consent look like outside of sex? So, again, a lot of times when we think about consent, we think of it pretty much only relating to sex, and that's not necessarily the case. So, within a relationship, what does consent look like outside of sex? So, I'm going to give you five different examples of what consent can look like in a relationship outside of sex. So, number one, getting everyone's input before planning activities. And this may be within your group of friends or just within your relationship. So, many of us have friends, roommates, or family members or partners tell us what we're doing without consulting with us first. This can unknowingly pressure people into situations that make them feel uncomfortable. Well, it's fine to invite someone to a pre planned event like a party, so long as they have the complete power to decline your invitation. You should get their input on anything you expect them to participate in. So, in a relationship, we want to make sure, yes, it's fun to plan date nights. Yes, it's fun to plan outings. Yes, it's fun to make plans for you and your partner, but we always need to give them the ability to participate, agree to participate, or decline to participate in whatever that is. Um, let's say in my relationship, I am really outgoing. I have a lot of energy. I love being around people. And parties are my jam, right? I love going to parties. I love meeting new people. I love, the vibe of parties and being around a lot of people and all that kind of stuff. But maybe my partner is more shy. And maybe parties are not their scene. Maybe they feel really uncomfortable at parties. Maybe they're a little awkward or shy. And I plan, for us to go to a lot of parties, and I don't really consult my partner before that, and I put them in situations that make them feel really uncomfortable, or they tell me that they feel uncomfortable in those places, and I just really like them, and I'm the planner of the pair, and so that's just what we end up doing all the time, and I'm not taking into consideration the fact that my partner feels uncomfortable in those situations. So having a conversation with them and making sure that they have the ability to participate or not, and also take part in the planning process of what you guys are gonna do in your relationship. All right, number two, in regards to what does consent look like outside of sex. So don't reveal personal information about anyone without their permission. We all know it's not okay to tell secrets, but even if someone hasn't prefaced a statement by whispering, I have a secret, they still may not want you to repeat it. Even if someone has nothing to be ashamed of, they may want to keep information about themselves from others for a number of reasons, such as fear that they won't react kindly. For example, it's never okay to reveal someone's sexual orientation if they're not out, or reveal that someone has been sexually assaulted without their permission. This is also not okay to tell other people about problems someone else is having. So making sure that we're being very vaulted and being very careful with the information that our partners share with us, that our friends share with us, inside and outside of an intimate relationship. Making sure that if we're having problems with our partner, we're really careful about who we go to receive help with that, and that person will not go and share that information with other people as well. All right, number three, obtain consent before engaging in non-sexual forms of touch. So consent for touching another person isn't just necessary in bed. It's necessarily for kissing, hugging, and other forms of physical contact as well. This guide is difficult to follow because our culture considers certain forms of touch necessary for polite conduct. Unfortunately, this is still commonplace mistakes for parents to make with their kiddos regarding receiving hugs from relatives and friends and things like that. So sometimes we're pressured into um, other forms of touch within a relationship or within a friend group um, that make us uncomfortable. So maybe there's someone in our group who likes to give neck massages or back massages, and there's something about that person that makes us feel uncomfortable. While it may be okay for one friend to do that, this one particular friend, makes me feel uncomfortable, and I should be able to say, no, that I don't like that. All right. Number four, obtain consent before photographing others. So not everybody wants to appear in an image, especially one that can be widely circulated. Some people simply want to protect their privacy, and others don't want to come across photos of themselves due to body image concerns. Everyone's body belongs to them and them alone. So just as you shouldn't touch without their permission, you shouldn't photograph without permission either. Um, so we want to make sure that everyone's okay with the photos that we're posting, that they're okay with us posting photos of them. This goes with friends and intimate relationships. This can also apply to tagging people in photos and tagging people at locations. Something that we talk a lot about in our public presentations is tagging friends when you're out without their permission on Facebook or Instagram or things like that. If they're in an abusive relationship and they are somewhere they're quote unquote not supposed to be, or if that tagging them is putting them in a position where their abusive partner can use that against them or make them feel guilty, or could potentially cause an explosion in that relationship, we want to be really careful about that. And not everyone wants to come right out and say that they're having issues in their relationship or that they're in an unhealthy or abusive relationship. So just making sure that you ask people when you're out and about, hey, I'm going to post these pictures and tag people in them or tag at the location. Is that okay with you? Okay. Number five, don't force a discussion someone doesn't want to have. So this can be really hard, especially when we're in a dispute. with a significant other or want very badly to resolve an issue so we can relax, go to bed, or move on with our day. But if someone doesn't feel like talking about something, it violates their boundaries to make them discuss it. Okay. As with sexual consent, it doesn't matter if you've spoken about it before, you've already started the discussion, anyone can refrain from a conversation or leave it at any time if it makes them feel uncomfortable. Even though feelings even though feeling uncomfortable in a conversation can be positive because it means that you're learning something new, it's entirely up to each individual how they want to stretch their comfort zone. This issue comes up not just in romantic relationships, but also in friendships. Your friend may be too upset to talk about the recent breakup, or family relationships. Not everyone wants to tell their parents about their love lives. Okay. So when you ask someone a personal question, you can help them feel more comfortable if you preface it by saying, if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to. It's never really anyone's responsibility to satisfy someone else's curiosity. Okay. So just 5 different ways about what consent looks like outside of sex. All right. So is consent different in long-term relationships? Um, it's really not. It may evolve a little bit, but I think sometimes in long-term relationships, we think we know how our partner is feeling all the time and what they want and what they like, and those sorts of things change. So just making sure that we're checking in and still reading those body cues and not just taking for granted that just because something we've done before, um, or we've done continuously before, that that's something that my partner is going to be comfortable with now. Um, I think trying new things and keeping things fresh in your relationship is great too. So making sure that we have conversations about that kind of stuff, before we just spring them on our partner and see if it's something that our partner is interested in trying also. All right, so can consent actually be sexy? So how does asking for consent actually make your relationship or your hookup better? So I think actually asking for consent can make that hookup or make that relationship a whole lot better. If you're taking the time to ask someone and check in with them about whether or not they are liking what's happening within that encounter, if it's feeling good for them, if they're on board, you're letting that person know that you care about them, that you care about their feelings, that you care that this is a good, fun experience for both of you. And that person is going to feel more comfortable. They're going to feel um, maybe like they trust you, right? It's going to build trust in that relationship. Maybe they are going to be willing to do more because you're taking the time to ask them and creating a space for them to be able to say, how they're feeling and what they like. And everyone's going to have a more enjoyable experience if it's um, a hookup and not necessarily a relationship. Maybe you will better your chances of being able to see that person again and hang out with them again and hook up with them again. Um, but definitely it builds trust in that relationship. It's showing respect for that person and it's making it a mutually enjoyable experience. It's not a one-sided experience where I'm only doing what, feels good for me and what I want, but I'm taking into account the other person's feelings as well. All right, so bonus consent extras. So these are some videos that we have found that we use quite often in our presentations that you can find on YouTube. So Consent is Like Tea is a great video to use or to watch. It puts a humorous spin on consent, which can be a heavy topic at times. It's really a great way to just bring to the forefront kind of the easiness of understanding consent. So I highly recommend you go check that out. Share it on your social media, share it with your friends, have a conversation about it. If you're a parent, you can definitely use this with your kids, middle school, high school, college, definitely as a way to start that conversation about what consent is and what it looks like. All right, sex needs a new metaphor. This is a great TED talk. I don't remember the guy's name that does it, but and he talks about the old adage of sex being like baseball and how we refer to the different bases and first base, second base, third base, home run, all of that kind of stuff, and what that metaphor implies, and how maybe using pizza as a metaphor is a better way to think about sex in a healthy way. So I highly recommend you check that one out. Also, Locker Room Talk Says Who is a great TED Talk. It is a great way to start conversations with the boys and men in your life. Her name is Alexis, and she runs an organization called Protect Her, and she goes into locker rooms across the United States and has conversations with athletes about consent and about healthy sex and about sexual assault. And it's a great TED Talk. It's about 20 minutes, and she has a longer version of her documentary that you can find online as well. If you're interested in that and you can't find it, feel free to email us, and we can get you the link for that. But Alexis's stuff is fabulous. All right. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. This is our contact information. If you have any questions or need to get in contact with us, our business office information is there Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then we also have a crisis hotline. So that crisis hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We can be reached at 936-441-7273. And this crisis hotline is not just for individuals who have experienced sexual assault or domestic violence. If you are a friend or family member or coworker or boss or professional who has come in contact with someone who has experienced domestic violence or sexual assault and you're not really sure what to do, you're in crisis also. So give us a call. Let us help you. We have tons of resources available. Even if you're not in our area, we can give you nationwide resources and help you find something in your area. So we hope you enjoyed the presentation today. We look forward to seeing you at another one of our presentations very soon, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.